My name is Sarah, and before my bridal party fell apart, I just wanted to feel my mom near me one more time, so I asked my best friend to keep her dress safe. I thought I was honoring her memory. Start here. You unzip a garment bag, heart full of hope, expecting to touch the silk your late mother wore when she married your father. But instead of lace and pearls, your fingers find crumpled newspaper. That was the moment I realized my maid of honor hadn't just betrayed me. My mother chose that dress in 1989. She wore it once before breast cancer stole her from us 12 years later. After she passed, my dad preserved it perfectly, always saying I'd walk the same aisle wrapped in her hope. That someday came when Mark proposed. I was finally going to wear her dress, and everything felt right in the world. Lacey and I had been inseparable since our freshman year of college. She was loud and charming, the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into, but she also had a sharp edge, a need for things to go exactly her way. When I got engaged, she practically demanded to be my maid of honor. Then she offered to store my mother's gown, insisting her cedar closet would keep it pristine. I was so grateful. I thought she was being generous. Looking back, I should have recognized the glint in her eye whenever she talked about expenses. She'd say things like, "Your mom would want you to be sensible, not sentimental." It started small, little comments about the venue being too expensive, the flowers being too extravagant. She kept pushing me to slash the budget, even though Mark and I could easily afford the wedding we wanted. When I finally put my foot down and told her no, she went quiet, dangerously quiet. I should have known then that Lacey didn't take no for an answer without consequences. 2 months before the wedding, I stopped by Lacey's to pick up the dress for alterations. She fumbled with her keys much longer than usual, and I noticed her hand had a fine tremor. The key scraped against the lock, clinking twice before it turned, and I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick. When she finally handed me the garment bag, her face was pale, and a thin sheen of sweat sat above her lip. She looked almost nervous. I unzipped it right there in her hallway, the zipper teeth parting with a sound that felt too loud in the quiet space. The smell hit me first, not just stale mothballs, but something sour and damp, like a basement that hadn't aired out in decades. There was an undercurrent of rot. Then I saw the crumpled newspaper stuffing, yellowed and brittle, the ink smudged in places where moisture had gotten to it. My legs gave out, not slowly, but all at once. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor, the zipper still in my hand, the empty bag pooling around me. The silk that should have been my mother's was nowhere in that bag, just those old papers, crumbling at the edges. Lacey stood over me with a cold, final look, the kind of look that says this conversation is already over. Her voice was so matter-of-fact when she said a pipe had burst, the dress was ruined, and she'd done me a favor by throwing away a moldy rag. For weeks afterward, I grieved. I remember the dampness of my pillowcase, the salt-stiffened fabric against my cheek. Mark held me in the quiet of our apartment, his shirt growing wet with my sobs, but the first calls for help went nowhere. Lacey insisted a pipe had burst, the dress had been ruined, and she had thrown it away before anyone else could inspect it. Without the dress in front of me, every authority figure treated it like an ugly civil dispute between friends, not a theft I could prove. Even some bridesmaids took her side. I can still hear their voices on the group message, telling me I was being dramatic, that I should focus on my own big day and stop dwelling on an old dress. My dad could barely talk about it without tearing up. Every time we spoke, he cleared his throat and changed the subject, as if naming the dress would reopen the whole wound. I felt like everyone had abandoned me. Then my friend Mia called. Her ringtone cut through a rainy Thursday afternoon. She had been browsing a consignment boutique downtown, one of those cramped little shops smelling of old silk and cedar. She sent me photos of a vintage gown hanging on a rack, and she described an unusual scalloped hem tag stitched inside. The tag was French. My mother's dress had come from a small boutique in Montreal. My dad had told me that story a dozen times. The moment I saw those photos, my hands started shaking. I knew right then it could not be a coincidence. My mother's dress was out there, hanging in some shop, and someone was about to answer for what they had done. I remember standing in that boutique, the air heavy with lavender and old cedar from the reclaimed wood shelves. The dress hung on a rack near the back, bathed in soft spotlights like it was a museum piece. My eyes went straight to the hem tag, that faded French script I had traced with my fingers as a little girl when my mother would let me play dress-up. My heart stopped. I stepped closer, and there it was, the faint wine stain on the sleeve, a pale burgundy shadow from my 9th birthday party when my mom had toasted too enthusiastically and spilled Merlot on herself, laughing it off as she dabbed at the silk. I had stood right there and watched her do it. Until that moment, I had been a victim. Grief had hollowed me out, and everyone told me I was being dramatic. But seeing that dress, my mother's dress, with an $800 price tag hanging from its zipper, something shifted behind my ribs. It was animal and hot, a rage that cleared away the fog. Lacey hadn't just thrown out a damaged dress, she had sold it. She had profited off my loss, off my mother's memory. And in that instant, I understood something I had been too naive to see before. She never truly supported me. She wanted to control me. When I refused to slash my wedding budget to her liking, she didn't throw a tantrum. She systematically tried to torch me. The realization made my hands shake. I knew I couldn't buy the dress myself because Lacey would recognize me, and the boutique was small, too personal. So I walked outside, stood on the sidewalk under a flickering streetlight, and I did not cry. I plotted. Mia didn't hesitate. She walked into that boutique the next morning with cash in hand and walked out with the garment bag like she was picking up dry cleaning. When she handed it to me in her kitchen, I remember how my fingers trembled unzipping the bag. The silk slid out like water, and the scent, faint rosewater and age, hit me so hard I had to sit down. I carefully laid the dress across her table and started examining every inch. First, the hem tag from the Montreal boutique where my mother had bought the dress. Then the tiny, almost invisible repair stitch my grandmother made in 1991 after I caught the hem on a door latch. But what turned my stomach and lit a new fire was the shipping label still tucked inside the garment bag lining. It was a consignment shop intake form, completely intact, with Lacey's seller ID number from her online closet account printed right on it. She had been so meticulous, so certain I would never see this, that she had documented her own identity for tax purposes. I photographed everything: the label, the tag, the repair stitch, the price tag, the wine stain. Then I started researching. Small claims court procedures in our state, how to trace a seller account, what constituted conversion of property. By midnight, I had pulled up her entire seller profile. She had been flipping things for months, labeling them as sentimental items from a deceased friend's estate. The words blurred on the screen as my vision narrowed. I was going to make the record impossible to dodge. Not in private, not with a quiet conversation that she could spin. I would do it at the rehearsal dinner, in front of everyone who believed her lies. The following nights blurred together into a fevered ritual. I built my dossier with the kind of obsessive focus I didn't know I had. First, I called the consignment shop. I practiced the conversation in my mirror, terrified they would dismiss me. But when I explained the situation, the manager went quiet for a long moment and then said, "Oh, honey, that dress was sold by Lacey Cartwright. I have her signed intake form right here." She was genuinely horrified. She emailed me copies of everything. I printed them, sleeved them in plastic, and added them to a binder that was quickly becoming a weapon. Meanwhile, Lacey kept sending me cheerful texts about her maid of honor speech, how she was so excited to stand beside me. She even posted a meme in our wedding group chat, a woman weeping in a bridal store with the caption, "Bridezilla's crying over fabric." Her friends laughed. I smiled too, a small, sharp thing. With every piece of evidence, every receipt, every time-stamped screenshot, that smile grew. I tracked down a seamstress who specialized in vintage restoration. She confirmed the dress had not been damaged by any pipe burst. The silk was old but pristine, deliberately stored. The only damage was the wine stain my own mother had put there decades ago. I had the estimate for restoration, the seller account history, the intake form with Lacey's signature, and a clear timeline that proved she had sold the dress weeks before she told me it was ruined. Public humiliation would come first, the court would come later. And if you're following along and feeling that familiar burn of righteous fury, subscribe, because the rehearsal dinner is next, and it is everything she deserved. A week before the rehearsal, Lacey asked to meet for coffee. She wore emerald green, the planner clutched under her arm as always, and she smiled that thin, cool smile. She said she hoped I had found a dress that fit my budget. I nearly choked on my latte. In that moment, I realized that privately confronting her, showing her the binder, and demanding an apology was too kind. She would spin it. She would make me the villain. She needed to feel the weight of exposure, the sudden collapse of every lie she had built. I walked out of that coffee shop and I adapted my plan. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant with a projector screen, normally used for anniversary slideshows. I called the manager, a woman who had known my mother, and I told her the truth. She agreed to help. Mia would sit at Lacey's table, close enough to capture her reaction on video. I carefully scanned every document, built a clean slideshow, and timed it to launch mid-speech. The question that kept circling, of course, was whether I was going too far. Was I becoming the very thing I hated? But every time I touched my mother's pearl earrings, still warm against my skin, I knew the answer. This wasn't about anger anymore, if it ever really was. It was about reclaiming my mother's dignity and showing Lacey that sentimental things are not worthless. They cost more than anything money could buy. I'd love to know, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have just walked away? Or would you have wanted the world to see the truth? Tell me in the comments. The night before the dinner, I was lying on my bed in the dark, trying to calm my nerves. The ceiling fan clicked in its slow rhythm above me, pulling shadows across the walls, and the sheets were bunched under my shoulders where I had been shifting for an hour. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification that Lacey had posted a new photo on Instagram. I almost ignored it, but I picked it up anyway, thumb scrolling out of habit. It was a mirror selfie in a designer dress, the fabric shimmering under her bathroom lights, the kind of gold-toned lighting that made everything look expensive and warm. Her hair was blown out, makeup perfect, chin tilted high. The caption read, "Treating myself for tolerating bridezilla." Her friends flooded the comments with applause, calling her a saint, telling her she deserved a medal. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I could feel my pulse in my temples, a steady thud against the inside of my skull. But as I stared at the photo, something in the background caught my eye. On her nightstand, half hidden behind a gold lamp, was an envelope. I pinched the screen to zoom in, holding my breath. The return address was the consignment shop. The faint lines of the date stamp were from the month she sold the dress. She was so utterly convinced I would never find out, so wrapped in her own smugness, that she had left this accidental confession sitting right there in the picture. A loose end she never thought to clean up. The air in my bedroom felt suddenly cold against my skin. I was barely breathing. The rehearsal dinner started just like any other. Candles flickered on long tables draped in cream linen, and the hum of conversation was warm and easy. I wore a simple cream dress and my mother's pearl earrings. Lacey, in her emerald sheath, looked like a queen surveying her court. She tapped her glass with a fork and rose for her speech. She started sweet, talking about our college days, how she had always been there for me, how she had, quote, shouldered my burdens. I watched her performance with a strange calm settling over me. Mid-sentence, when her smile was at its widest, I nodded at Mia, who was seated at the corner of the room. The projector flickered to life. On the wall behind Lacey, huge and undeniable, appeared her seller confirmation page. Then the intake form, her tight handwriting right there. Then the listing price of my mother's dress, $800. The room went silent except for a single sound, Lacey's champagne glass shattering on the hardwood floor. She spun around, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. I stood slowly, lifted the restored dress out of the garment bag beside my chair, and held it up like a trophy. My voice was steady. "Lacey, did you shoulder my burden all the way to the consignment counter?" The room erupted. Her mother was the loudest, half rising from her chair, shouting that Lacey had told everyone I had given her the dress to sell because I thought it was ugly. That was the moment the mask truly fell, and the real Lacey stood naked in the wreckage of her own lies. The room went completely silent after the slideshow ended, except for Lacey's mother still half standing, her face frozen in shock. I pulled out the shipping label first and explained that it traced back to Lacey's seller account on the consignment platform. The date, the tracking number, the buyer message, all of it matched. Then I showed them the hem tag, the one my grandmother had stitched back together when I was a little girl. I pointed to the tiny repair, the exact same thread and pattern visible in photos of my mother wearing the dress. Lacey tried to speak, but the room had stopped giving her air. That was when I played the boutique recording. The clerk confirmed Lacey had brought in the dress and described it as a vintage collection piece. Lacey screamed that I had set her up. I did not raise my voice. I handed her a copy of the demand letter and the small claims evidence packet. Shipping label, platform listing, hem tag photos, boutique confirmation, restoration estimate, and filing receipt. My demand was simple: pay back the sale price, pay for restoration, and tell the truth. She ripped the copy in half and shouted that the dress was just old cloth. That was the moment everyone at the table finally understood who had treated my mother's memory like inventory. No one asked me to soften it after that. Lacey fled the restaurant in tears before anyone could say another word. But the evidence followed her. Within hours, screenshots of the slideshow and news of the recording moved through our social circle faster than any apology she could draft. My bridesmaid replacements arrived for the wedding without drama, and Lacey was removed from every part of the day. The legal part came later, and it was much less theatrical than the dinner. In small claims court, the judge looked at the listing, the shipping label, the boutique intake information, the hem tag, the recording, and the restoration estimate. Lacey tried to argue that I had embarrassed her, but embarrassment was not a defense to selling property that was not hers. The judge awarded the sale price, restoration costs, and filing costs. It was not a movie-style fortune or triple damages, but it was enough to make the point official. She sold several designer handbags to pay the judgment. A few weeks later, her mother apologized privately and said Lacey had always envied the relationship I had with my mom. It explained the cruelty without excusing it. I did not feel triumph. I felt tired, relieved, and grateful that my mother's dress was back where it belonged. On my wedding day, I put on my mother's dress, and it felt like stepping into her arms. The seamstress had worked a miracle. She removed every trace of the wine stain, but she left that tiny mended seam from my grandmother completely visible, just as I had asked. It was imperfectly perfect. Walking down the aisle, I could feel my mother with me in every thread, every stitch. The soft weight of the fabric, the faint scent of the cedar chest it had been stored in, it all wrapped around me like a promise kept. Mark wept when he saw me. And my father, my strong, steady father, he had to sit down because his legs actually buckled. I learned that letting go of toxic friendships opens up room for healing you didn't even know you needed. And if my journey to reclaim what was taken meant something to you, subscribe for the next chapter of standing up for what's right. Lacey once mocked me for caring about a hem tag, rolling her eyes and calling me petty in that sharp, nasal voice she used when she thought she was winning. But that little piece of fabric, with my grandmother's careful stitching, the thread still holding after all these years, led me straight to the truth. Karma didn't just come for her. It sat down at the dinner table wearing my mother's gown, the same champagne silk catching the candlelight, while Lacey's face went pale as bone china. I can still hear the clink of silverware stopping, the sudden hush that fell over the room, the way her wine glass trembled slightly in her manicured fingers. We often think revenge is ugly, something dark and bitter that leaves a stain on everyone it touches. But accountability can be beautiful.